start with a bit of a look back in time. It's almost 15 years since the start of the financial crisis. And actually, it's quite surprising, certainly for the sell side, how little has changed over those 15 years. Most capital markets franchises continue to destroy shareholder value. Capital requirements have gone up, clearly. Low interest rates, maybe something will happen about that over the coming years. But frankly, a lot of it is around the stubbornly high cost bases that we all enjoy, or not so much. We're at a crossroads as an industry. That's my contention. This situation can't go on. Logically, many capital markets sell-side franchises should be reducing yet further what they do, who they trade with, what they trade. But seemingly they continue as if little has changed. So my conjecture is that the industry is at a crossroads, perhaps the end of the road. Maybe that's me being too doom and gloomy. Business models remain way too convoluted, and we've heard from speakers and panelists so far, a lot of that is down to the fragmented and costly IT estates that underpin those business models. Our research at Luxoft, and this is a snapshot of 2020 and 2021. Our research at Luxoft has calculated the vast sums that are being spent on IT across the industry, the sell-side part of the industry, that is. But little has changed over the last 5 years in terms of the cost-income ratios along the bottom, as well as the return on equity up the side. The industry has stood still, and Europe in particular is an outlier in that regard. Underspending on IT compared to certainly the Americas and Asia, and woefully underperforming in terms of cost-income ratios. On top of that, and it's funny, Matt said something before about how spend is going to change now. We're out of the reg period, if you like. A lot of the issues being faced by sell-side institutions is the underspend that they've been making over the last few years in their current estates. They're very fragile. They're full of bottlenecks and operational risks. And for some of us, myself included in the past, we've been the subject of uncomfortable regulatory scrutiny for those operational risks. The need for wholesale and radical transformation is overwhelming, particularly in the middle and back office processes and platforms which form the bulk of firms' cost bases. Transformation is also needed, though, in the approach to servicing clients. Frankly, it's embarrassing just how manual that is for our sales and traders, particularly considering the digital world that we all as consumers live in and how easy it is to interact digitally with the world. But the cost-cutting strategies of the last decade, they're not delivering the results. Firms are running out of options, struggling to squeeze costs still further, but frankly, unable to make the case for the massive investment that's needed to deliver the step change in efficiency required. To make matters worse, the investments being made or being asked for are predicated on a belief that each firm's requirements are unique, requiring a highly tailored operating model, organizational construct, and bespoke technology solutions. This flies in the face of the fact that, arguably, we all trade the same products with the same clients in the same way in the same geographies. There's little that's genuinely unique these days in this industry on the sell side, and certainly that is the case when the trade is executed. So this slide is a representation of some research that McKinsey did recently, and as it demonstrates, I think, the unicorn attitude that most firms have leaves them reliant on finding and trying to retain a small number of senior resources with a unicorn combination of business domain expertise, specific know-how about the firms they're working for, and then hopefully the right technology skills. Those unicorns are in short supply. Firms are struggling to retain them, particularly post-pandemic. So firms have always and are continuing to resort to armies of cheap and relatively inexperienced engineers to make up the difference. Compounding this productivity problem is the lost in translation problem. Most firms, arguably some will have been going through agile transformations, but most firms still struggle to connect the business users to the people cutting code. And they employ armies of people to do that translation. And that's a huge cost base, and lots of stuff gets lost in translation, compounding the productivity issue. So if you look at the McKinsey research, 15% or less is being spent on real transformation, and their paper would point to that in reality in terms of productivity being 1 to 5% of IT spend. So the effectiveness of the sums being spent is woeful. It's no surprise then that the industry, the sell-side part of the industry in particular, is awash with underfunded and struggling change programs. And delivery records are pretty poor. At best, there's minor improvements to the status quo. At worst, outright failure, cancelled projects, yet more complexity, yet more cost being piled up. My view is that this is way more than a problem of architectural simplification. The real simplification required is in the entire approach to how firms manage and deliver their systems, a task that has spread IT organizations and their budgets far too thinly. Businesses instead need to properly focus on what truly differentiates them in the eyes of their clients, dedicating the full focus of their IT functions to that, and treating non-differentiating business functions as services to be sourced from or handled by third parties. I'm not suggesting that that's easy to do. Certainly politically, it's a challenge. But look around you, and we find that most of the arguments against such a change will be from the vested interests. Sometimes internal IT, we've heard references in previous panels and speeches to empire building. Yeah, that's part of the problem, but really it's the wider business community in firms. Each of them wants the change to their systems done in a way that suits them, that's unique to them, that requires focus from people that they can arguably control and beat up. So IT's stuck in the middle on all of this, and the business is what's suffering as a result. Perhaps an easier way to approach this would be to ask who actually cares about each and every business function. If the answer isn't the clients, then the IT for that function could, and arguably should, be done by properly equipped service providers, leaving the business and internal IT to focus wholeheartedly on optimizing front office processes and investing in client-centric, insight-rich tooling. Let's be clear, when I talk about non-differentiating functions as services that can be sourced from those third parties, I'm not advocating more of the same sort of outsourcing that's dominated this industry for the last 20 years. That approach over the last 20 years is centered on reducing the unit cost of the humans doing the work, but by and large has left the work unchanged. That traditional kind of outsourcing has its place, but the need to find and manage all those people, decide what they work on, direct how much work they do, how that work gets done, all that remains unique to each firm engaging that work. Firms end up still doing all the thinking, taking all the risk, bearing all the cost, and the results speak for themselves. It isn't working. Imagine how much cheaper and better that work would be if it was done at scale as a service for the industry by industry providers. Providers who are specialists in what they do and who mutualize the cost across the many clients who use their services. The concept's not new. Market data providers, exchanges, clearing houses, telecom network providers all provide services and solutions that firms would never dream hopefully never dream, of trying to do for themselves. And the same can be said about the move to cloud and away from in-house infrastructure. If you look at the buy side of capital markets, you'll find that many are already a long way down this path, with significantly better profitability as a result. Imagine a world where this sort of as-a-service delivery is the norm for most of what the sell side does, delivered at a vastly reduced cost as a result. How much more time and money would be available to devote to what those firms' clients actually need? Making more money for the firm, making more money for the clients. Big, bold decisions are needed if the industry is to find a way out of its current value-destroying mess. The status quo, in my view, is unsustainable. The revenue cavalry aren't just over the horizon. The spreads of old aren't going to gallop into town to sort this mess out. Some firms won't have it in them to make the decisions, especially when careers are on the lines. Some, fearful of the risk of not wanting to overlook the details and make mistakes, will get lost in the weeds. When it comes to change, many CIOs and COOs are most worried about the risk of getting it wrong, even at the expense of getting it right. Recent research by Deloitte gives me hope, predicting that almost half of IT will be as a service in nature by 2025. Early adopters, according to Deloitte, are already citing significant benefits, not just in terms of reduced and more predictable costs, but also in terms of ease of adoption, ease of management, and interoperability with other systems. The idea that firms have to have all the answers, do all the thinking when it comes to their IT needs, is starting to look outdated. And this is not just a technology challenge. Adopting industry standard platforms is not simply a matter of exchanging like for like. It's also about adapting business processes to fit industry standard patterns. This dance of adoption and adaptation has to be choreographed, and it's not easy. And at the same time, there's business as usual to keep up with. It's no wonder that many firms are tentative because of the inevitable compromises that are going to have to be made when it comes to standardization. So where do we start? In my view, we start with deciding on what differentiates our firms in the eyes of our clients. Everything else is arguably a waste of time and resources. Clarity about how and where we can realistically compete allows us to identify what stays in-house and what doesn't. As for the rest, those non-differentiating activities can and should be done as simply and as efficiently as possible. In other words, in my view, outsource completely to industry providers who can invest the sums of money required to take on the shorter-term management of the existing stacks, whilst evolving and migrating those piecemeal, carefully, over time, to industry standard platforms to get the economies of scale required. So to conclude, I think the future is as a service. It won't be for everything. It won't be for all of us. But the future is as a service for those non-differentiating parts of the business. And the reason it is not just because it's the right thing to do for those parts of the business. It's to free up the sums of money required to take the client-facing activities of sell-side firms and transform those into the sorts of businesses and the sorts of operating models that clients are beginning to expect in their already experienced in their private lives and are beginning to expect in their professional lives. If we don't do it, others are going to do it for us. So now's the time for change. Thank you.